Welcome to the XY Advisor podcast. To join a global community of financial advisors sharing and learning with one another to drive the positive evolution of financial advice, head to xyadvisor.com.
G'day, Clayton here from XY Advisor, joined today by Marshan, Head of Policy at the FPA. Thanks for joining me, mate.
Thanks, Clayton. Good to be here.
Yeah. So a lot going on in the industry, and you guys decided to punch out a document which basically, to me, 90% of it is such no-brainer, and it's the stuff that advisors have been talking about for a long time, that first and foremost, I got to say, it's awesome to see the leading body in this country tackling topics which will ultimately lead to advice being better. So have you found for the first time in I don't know how long, but you guys come out with something, everyone's like, yay, like round of applause. Does it feel good?
It is refreshing to be able to go on the on things like XY and other forums, and even our own community that we've got running, and be given positive feedback on something we've done. And it's great, and it's frustrating as well, because I think there is nothing in the new policy platform that we haven't been saying before or hasn't been part of the work we've been doing. We've just put it into a nice new document. But it's nice that I think one of the valid criticisms of the FPA, and the hand on heart, I will own up to this, is we are generally not great at communicating what we're doing, what we're asking for, what we're advocating for, the successes we've had, because unfortunately in my role, particularly over the last 5 years, it has been so busy with regulatory reform. When you've got 7 regulators, when you've got government, when you've got the length and breadth of financial services and how complex it is, we're just sprinting non-stop to respond to regulators and government and pieces of legislation that we often don't have time to stop and say, guys, this is what we're doing. So, so the feedback has been really pleasing, and I think a positive step for us that we've been able to put it all into one document and say, you know what, this is what we're going to work on for the next 5 years, and this is our vision for what the future of advice is. And I think the reaction from individuals, to your point, has been really refreshing and really, really well accepted. And everybody goes, yeah, that is what my job as a financial planner should look like. And these are the things that will make what I do as a professional better for my clients. And it'll make it easier for my clients to get advice. It'll make it cheaper to get advice. And these are all positives. The reaction we've had from licensees has not been unexpected. But on the other hand, it's also a little bit surprising, because we have been having these conversations with them for 5, 10 longer years about what the future of the profession needs to look like. So it's not unsurprising, but it's some of the ferocity of it has been a little bit, has taken us back a little bit.
Yeah. Look, from where I'm looking, it's hard for someone like yourself at the FPA, I would imagine, when so much change is just getting beaten over the industry's head. And you guys are sort of in a position where, no big institution has zero conflicts, right? So you've got to consider revenues coming in from one way, purpose for existing is coming from another, and you've got to kind of manage that. And the FPA is no different. And so much change and challenge has come to this industry for so long, and you guys are seen as like this front line of defense in a way, right? Which is, the mandate's huge. and the government has had to an unhealthy, I would say, governments, there's no one government, but I would say the governments in, the last few governments have had an unhealthy obsession with financial advice. Now, some of that has been rightfully so. There's not a single person alive that would ever defend, say, Storm Financial or of advisors that are blatantly doing the wrong thing. There's no one. We're as excited to see them smashed as much as possible. But then it's gotten to this stage, and I was talking about it with Phil Keelan when he was on not long ago, that it looks like they're at a stage where they're just trying to legislate out humanity and legislate out the potential from the states. And that to me is really disheartening. And it's disheartening for advisors, of course. And then it's got to be tough for you guys. And so, one of the things you mentioned before was it's hard to communicate the good things that are going on or the work that you're doing because, there's a bomb that's just gone off 2 meters to my left. And now I got to jump on that and see what's up. So I definitely have a certain set of sympathy for the role and for everything that goes on. And I think in a lot of ways, like you guys cop it, I think, harder than what should be. Like that's my personal opinion. But I'm sort of a half glass full kind of guy. And so with this document that's turned up, it's really good. It's really good to see what it is that you're discussing. And I've got 4 points in particular that I'd love to go through in a bit more detail. Mm-hmm. A lot of the first ones that you sort of put up, I think it's smart because if you consider the FPA in other countries, let's say South Africa, for example, there's no licenses there, right? There's no dealer groups. And so advisors have a much clearer connection to the FPA, to the CFP, because that's how that they prove that they're a good advisor, right?
Yeah.
But in this country, it's a bit different. So you've kind of got, you guys are like over here, and then the real relationship is the licensee. And that's been a weird result of commission payments and all that stuff, which advice is rapidly moving away from. And so there's some really cool stuff, I think, in this document, which I'd love to go over. But if we can just touch on that first bit in the document, I think it's smart for the FPA because if you guys are the body, I think if you guys are the ones putting forward the guidelines and doing the judging and all of it, in a lot of ways, will that take the strain off ASIC? Is your goal was the FPA goal to move all of the work that ASIC is doing onto the FPA, or do you expect to work with them, or if you guys end up becoming, the body that handles everything, is that you saying to the government, we've got it from here, or do they have to continue doing work?
So I think, so just to take a step back, the document itself has 3 main parts, and those parts are made up of policy pillars, which are sort of our framework for how we describe everything. There's values of advice, which I think's it's actually quite a cool infographic.
It is
page which sets out what is the value of advice to consumers and to government and to regulators. And then there's 19 recommendations. So I think you're asking about the single disciplinary body idea within there. I think, unfortunately, that's really what Code Monitoring Australia had been designed to do. What you were describing to be that disciplinary body for financial planners and to take the work of monitoring and holding individual financial planners accountable to their advice. That's what that Code Monitoring body, Code Monitoring Australia, as one of the organisations doing that, was designed to do in the Corporations Act. Unfortunately, in November last year, the government announced that they wanted to go in a different direction. And so that direction is going to be that they will actually set up a new regulator of individual financial planners, whose responsibility will be to be a disciplinary body. Right. So basically they're taking what was going to be this organisation that the FPA and 4 other associations were going to set up and build it themselves. The problem with that, in our perspective, is we already have 7 regulators. And so if you're going to add an 8th, it's just like the whole thing is just getting out of control and messy. And the number of planners that complain about the cost of advice and the number of regulators, and you almost, and I hate saying this, but you have to say it. And the minister's kind of cottoned onto it recently and said it a couple of times, but you kind of can't provide compliant advice, because if you meet the privacy requirements of the Privacy Act that's regulated by the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, then you're going to breach the ones from the TPB, which are different to the ones with ASIC, which means you're going to breach those. If you comply with the TPB's regulation, you will often breach ASICs. If you comply with ASICs, you might breach the AUSTRACs, and it kind of just doesn't work. And, you know, this is the beauty to a certain extent, and I know I'm going to get shot for this, but of the FASEA Code of Ethics is that it just kind of takes everything up to a different level and says, principally, comply with the law and put your clients first and don't accept conflicts. And like, it kind of simplifies everything, but in a much higher level. So our argument with a single disciplinary body is, you've got all these other regulators and they do lots of other stuff, but let's have a body that sits in the middle of it all, is the interface with individual financial planners and says, this is the set of rules that you need to comply with. And if you comply with this set of rules, then you are doing the right thing and you won't get in trouble. Everything else is just noise and other stuff that might need to go on, but actually probably isn't relevant to what you do on a day-to-day basis as a financial planner with your client. And so if we're doing that, then how can we get rid of the other 7? How can we merge in FASEA? How can we merge in registrations? And everything kind of sits around this idea of having a single regulator that regulates professional financial advice, which is not dissimilar to what happens with lawyers in that they've got a single regulator effectively in the courts, which is not dissimilar to what you have with doctors, where they have a single disciplinary and registration model with the Medical Practitioners Board. Yeah. This is how professions operate. Professions don't operate with 7 regulators, 8 once you add this one in as well. And so the whole regulation of financial advice, where you have you know who is going to look at your files and who is going to make decisions about whether or not you comply or not, who sets the education standards, who sets the compliance standards, who sets the code of ethics, who sets the ongoing education, the CPD standards, who engages with other regulators, say, okay, this is tax law, this is corporations law, this is privacy law, this is anti-money laundering, counterterrorism law. But how do they operate effectively at a financial planner, having a meeting, having an appointment, having a relationship with an individual consumer? How does that all hang together? Having this one body there that will just make it all clear and easy to understand.
Yeah.
Now, as I said, we would love for that to be the FPA.
Yeah, as long as it's someone. I would like, it needs to be someone, because the fact that advice is at the whims of all just everything else that has a say, and there's nothing that's interpreting everything through just a singular, is ridiculous. Yeah. And so I hope it's for all of the critiques that have ever come to the FPA's way, whatever. Like, if it ultimately ends up with there's one place that we can get to, so we know how to operate, right? I mean, you do hear it from advisors. What on earth can you, like, literally, this is what advisors are going off now. I'm doing things because I know that they're good, but I have absolutely no way of telling that if someone was to come back through my files over the last decade with a fine-tooth comb, that they won't find something that's gone wrong somewhere, right?
Like the case in point recently has been this early access to superannuation due to COVID, right? And we've got the Corporations Act, which says you need to follow these rules to provide advice. We've got ASIC, which has got rules around disclosure, and it's got rules around information collecting, and it's got rules around scaled advice and holistic advice. You've got the FASEA Code of Ethics that sits there and says you need to consider not only what's going on today, but the client's long-term financial situation. And so ASIC comes out and says you can provide an ROA and you can provide advice to the consumer on accessing this. And if you do it in this way, you can charge $300 for it. And everybody goes, nah, can't do it, can't comply with it. Okay, all right, but why? Like, the regulator is actually sitting there telling you you can do this, you can provide this advice, but FASEA, well, no, FASEA says you need to consider the client's, whether or not the advice is appropriate and in the best interest of the client. Is it appropriate in the best interest of the client for somebody who's lost their job, can't put food on the table, can't pay their mortgage, to not access money when they need it? Well, it is appropriate. Okay, but what about the long-term interest? Well, if they can't eat and they don't have a house to live in, they don't really have long-term interests. ASIC says you can provide an ROA. You don't need to do a full SOA for this. But it's a new piece of advice. No, I know that, but ASIC says you don't need to do an SOA in this circumstance. Okay. But how much? But I have to do a full fact find. Well, no, you don't need to do a full fact find. ASIC is saying that you can scale it in this way. We worked with ASIC on the ROA. We created a fact find attached to that ROA to help quantify exactly what information you need. You don't need a lot of information. You can do it. You can do it quick, and you can do it really easy. So, like, this is the problem, and we almost need one. We absolutely need one body that sits there and goes, okay, these regulators have said all these things, but this is how it works for you in front of this client.
Definitely.
And this is what we're going to hold you accountable to.
It goes without saying, and it's so necessary. And just to give advisors like a sense of confidence, because confidence is insanely low. And it doesn't, I mean, I'm sure it doesn't surprise you either, Ben. Like, advisors, they're just in shell shock from so much change that someone comes along and says, you can definitely do this. The advisor's thinking, sure, what about in 6 years from now, something goes wrong, I get pulled up, and I've risked everything for $300 less my time and less resources. I'm essentially taking on all this risk for $50.
No, absolutely. And the reality is you've got the law that sits here, and then you've got the regulator that regulates here, and then you've got the licensee that provides sort of rules around there. And unfortunately, because the relationship and the authorization to provide advice and the person who monitors and supervises you is the licensee. Yeah. The number of calls we get from members that say, my licensee says I have to do this. I go, well, okay, they authorize you, they monitor and supervise you, you have to comply with their rules. Yeah. It's not what the law says, but licensees put this risk measure over the top of it, and they go, well, we've seen other planners within our licensee do these things wrong, and so we're going to put this protective barrier around everybody who's licensed under us. So you've got a lot of chefs, actually you've got a lot of cooks who are trying to explain and create rules and regulations around this conversation that we're having.
No, absolutely. And then
on the client, and to, like the point you were making earlier about the government coming in and making, 7 regulators and so many rules and so many things. And I have, I've spent 5 years just waking up with 5 different submissions that are due the next day is because it is almost impossible to comply with being a financial planner these days. And therefore, every time we do something and every time somebody looks at something, something's wrong. And if something's wrong, it will come up in an inquiry, it will come up in a court, or it'll come up with a regulator, it'll come up with somebody, and they'll be able to ping you because you kind of can't comply with the way things are at the moment. And so we have been an easy victory for the government. It is really easy to say, here's evidence of a financial planner who is doing something wrong, and therefore we're going to create a law to stop that. Yeah. And so we just get another law, and we get another law. The one thing that I love about working for the FPA is the regulators and the government. They come and talk to us and they say, we're thinking of doing this. How will it work? And we won't change their mind. They will not do FASEA, and they won't add all sorts of changes to the law, right? But they will talk to us, and we are able to demonstrate with them why a certain way of doing it is going to make things more expensive and take longer and just isn't going to work in practice when there is this practical way that you can actually do it. And more often than not, they will implement the more practical way of doing it. And, you know, for that's something that at least I can wake up every morning and go, I can speak to a regulator, I can speak to a politician, I can speak to licensees, and I can say this is a better way of doing it, and generally it will get done. Now, hopefully we get to a point where this single disciplinary body is the one who's in the middle and doing all these things. Unfortunately, it won't be FPA because the government's decided to set up a regulator on its own. But hopefully, if we can, you know, use this policy platform as our framework, we can demonstrate to them having one body instead of 7 is going to make a lot more sense. Having one body instead of 7 is going to make it cheaper and more effective to provide advice. Having one body instead of 7 means that consumers know where to go if they need help. Planners know where they need to go to get help. Licensees know where they need to go to get help. And it's the focal point of what we do. And it's going to make everything cheaper. It's going to make everything clearer. It's going to make everything better for everybody. And so that's kind of the vision that sits around all this.
Well, they run a huge risk. And I'll repeat the word huge. The amount of questions I've had around how do I do advice or as close to advice as possible without having to be an advisor. Like, I mean, that question is coming up so much. Now, what's that tell me? That tells me that there's a bunch of people who love this job, who love helping people, who want to have an impact, but they are so unsure about this industry that they have to figure out a parallel way of achieving it completely outside of the rules. So it's literally, if the government, or if there's not something done to clean all this up, you're going to have a parallel profession, which does almost exactly the same thing, but there's just no product recommendation at the back. Imagine that. Imagine that someone came to see.
You don't have to imagine it. It's happening.
It's already happening, and it's going to keep happening. And I don't defend unlicensed advice as this panacea of all the problems that are out there. However, it's a natural market reaction. If the government wants to legislate out humanity out of people, they're going to end up with a far bigger problem, which is growing every day. And so getting one place where there is a simple answer. Here's another thing. So on the weekend, speaking with an advisor, great advisor, just really, really good advisor. And they're talking to me about how scared they are of, at any point in the future, of someone just going back through their historical files, right, over the last decade. And it's such a genuine concern. And I don't think enough thought has been put into that, because this really good advisor, who I guarantee you, you just do not want this advisor to leave the industry. It's a very, very good advisor. But the fact that this advisor is considering it is such a bad sign. It's such a bad sign for this industry.
But again, this is why the FPA was so committed to setting up a code monitoring body and doing this, because we are financial planners. I've been a financial planner. I'm a practitioner. I've sat in front of clients the same way all the listeners have. And we understand advice, and we understand that relationship between individuals. And so that's why we wanted to be a code monitoring body. And like, we're hopeful, and what we're pushing for is that the regulator, the single disciplinary body, when they get set up, is set up by practitioners, for practitioners, with practitioners on tribunals, and it's practitioners that are holding other practitioners responsible when things come in. Because when there is something that a licensee says you need to do, which is above the law and above the regulation, but it creates a conflict there with what you might be required to do, the person adjudicating it has to understand that relationship and that authorization and the way that works. The person who's adjudicating the case has to understand that sometimes clients come in and they say yes, 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 until the point you get to implementing it and then say, no, I want something different. Or they come in and they say, I want to do this really dumb thing.
Yeah.
And then what you do, you can't talk them out of it. And you make the philosophical judgment and the professional judgment, then maybe it's better if I watch over this thing happening and give them
100%.
Give them a little bit of my time and attention to make sure at least they do it the right way.
Yep.
Not what I would recommend, but at least it's done the right way. And so that's why we that's why you want practitioners involved in these things. And you want that level of understanding of what's that relationship between the planner and the client, and what's all this other stuff that we got to have in the back of our minds and deal with it. But I think on the whole, you're right. There's a massive problem that, I had a phone call on Friday where one of our members was saying that my licensees just rang up and asked me to provide files from early 2008 for review.
Killer. How do you even sleep at night? Because from what I'm told, the advisors aren't even getting judged on the rules and regulations of at the time. They're getting judged based on what's now.
And the problem is, what's worse is that for years and years and years, they've been audited, they've been through pre-vets, they've been through post-vets, and they're told your file's fine.
100%.
Everything you're doing is fine. It's good. It complies.
Yep.
And then suddenly these new programs come in and these new reviews come in, and then suddenly you get told, well, no, actually what you were doing 12 years ago, I don't even remember the client from 12 years ago. I don't remember the file. I don't remember the client. I've got absolutely, but there's a box that's not ticked, or there's a piece of information that in an ideal world you would have collected, but in the reality of that relationship with that client, you've missed it. And maybe it's not applicable, because often it's not applicable, but we just didn't cross things out.
File notes weren't even
12 years ago.
File notes weren't even a thing that long ago.
They were, but
a little bit, but they weren't
really, right?
They weren't like mandatory.
Now I'm being reported to ASIC for something I did 12 years ago. This is interesting because I've got a financial planner, right? And I think he listens to this, so he'll get a kick out of this. But he's licensed through one of the secondary dealer groups of a large group.
Sure.
They've been told by ASIC to do reviews on everybody. They've been told to go back. My file's a bit odd. Right?
Is that because you're a bit odd?
Well, no, I'm not a bit odd, but you know what? So you do a risk profile on me and I come out as conservative.
Sure.
And to me, being conservative at the age of 30, like I was when we set up this piece of advice with my superannuation, which I'm not going to touch for 40 years.
It's not the best thing to do.
Is to go into something that is really, really aggressive, right?
Yeah.
It's got a 40-year time horizon. The only conservative strategy for that is to go really aggressive. So something geared.
Yeah.
Get some gearing in there. That's what I told him. Get some gearing in there. He goes, but you're conservative. I said, I know I'm conservative, but this is the conservative investment strategy.
Wow.
Anyway, so 7, 8, 10 years has gone past since we did that piece of advice. They've picked up that file, looked at it, and they've come to me and said, do you know that your plan has put you into this really, really aggressive investment option when your risk profile is conservative? I said, yeah, I know my risk profile is conservative. All my cash is sitting in my offset account because I want to pay off my mortgage as quickly as possible. But you know where I want my super? I want it really, really aggressive. They go, yeah, but that doesn't make sense. I go, well, actually, I did the, do you know what I do type thing? Well, you know, you're in compliance. I said, well, yeah, okay, all right. Let's just stick with that. But they offered me $40,000 in compensation for the advice fees that I'd paid over the years for all the advice and pain and suffering for the fact that he had given me the investment that I wanted.
Oh, man.
And he'd given me the risk profile I wanted and the investment I wanted. And despite the fact that I had signed it off all the way through, I knew what I was doing, they knew what kind of role I was in, they're offering me $40,000 in compensation, which would have come out of his pocket because that's how these things work, right?
Yeah.
And this is the problem with the way the system works at the moment.
It's worse than a problem.
He's done everything right.
That's
everything right. And because he's got me as a client who knows what they want and knows how it works and understands it, and therefore doesn't fit in the little puzzle piece or square or circle or whatever shape you want to stick me in. Suddenly he's $40,000 out of pocket.
Yeah.
10 years later.
It's actually, it makes being an advisor impossible.
Yeah.
It does. It makes being an advisor impossible. So something's got to get done.
What's worse is if they'd rung my wife, she would have taken the money. She doesn't get it.
No, 100%. It's like, of course, and if there's huge companies that are turning up and saying, hey, can we pay you all this money? 99% of people are going to take it. And it's absurd. And look, if getting you guys in as the center of a bunch of different regulators is the answer to all of this, I'm going to back it, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we just need a goddamn way to push forward with this profession. And at the moment, the repercussions for anything not perfect are so intense that it's making a lot of advisors very nervous. But moving on. So 3.2 in the document, separation between product and advice. Brilliant. Yep. Love it. I know that there's in the legislation, it deals with both of these as hand in hand, that they're the same thing. This needs to 100% get changed. Huge supporter of that. How long have you been working on it? Can you talk about the strategy? You know, I'd love to know more.
Well, I mean, this has been something that the FPA has been sort of calling on for a long time, but again, this is another one where there's this little bit of disconnect between different regulators. So the Corporations Act, we're all sort of regulated about the financial products that we sell, and advice is a product as defined by the Corporations Act, but it is treated a little bit differently. But it's all about the products that is effectively the regulation. So if you don't recommend a product and you don't recommend a class of product, then you don't fall into financial advice, and therefore things are different. But on the other hand, with the TPB, you're actually regulated for the services you are providing as a financial planner or a tax financial advisor, as they define it, not products. So with that, again, you've got this situation where if you're doing the service, then you're in the TPB world, but it's not until you actually recommend a class of product or a specific product that you actually fall into the Corporations Act world. So again, you can almost get yourself in trouble for not recommending products and classes of products with ASIC, but you comply with what you need to do with the TPB. But ironically, you go a bit further and suddenly you've got a problem with the TPB because you've done something wrong, because nobody knows the TPB's codes and stuff. Anyway, so every conversation, every thread, everybody goes, I just want to provide strategic advice to my clients. I don't really want to be recommending the products. We need products to implement the solutions, but I'd also like a nice, easy option where I can just talk to my client about superannuation as a class of product and as a strategy, and we can and that can be regulated in that way. And so that's kind of what we're trying to get to. How can we have a conversation and a relationship with a client where we help them sort out their financial position, but we don't recommend XYZ balance fund?
Yeah.
We just don't need to get to that point. That's not the behavior that we need to sort out our client. They have default superannuation funds. They have cash accounts and savings. They have a little share portfolio. That's all fine. The stuff we need to deal with is, how do you budget? What if you've got spare money? What do you do with it? If you don't have enough money, how do you cope with that? If you have a little bit of extra, stick it into super, or don't stick it into super. You need to be protected for this, and have those conversations at a strategic level. So effectively that recommendation is how do we separate product and advice? How do we have advice in a way that respects that relationship with the client, provides them with the strategy that they need, allows you to have an ongoing relationship and ongoing guidance with them. If they need help with products at certain points, then step in with that or send them to somebody else. And then focus the product regulation on actually making sure products are good and work and are sold to the right people more broadly. When a financial planner gets involved, make sure they've got all the information that they need to actually make the right determination that geared share fund that Ben Marshan actually wants, that's the right one, even though he's a conservative investor. And it's okay that he's a conservative investor because he's going to be in there for 40 years.
Yeah.
All that sort of stuff, that stuff works a lot more effectively and works right.
So you've dipped into 3.3 here with the regulation of products. So basically, and it was really cool to see Alex Vikovich do a story on you guys in the AFR. And he's been a long-term critic of licenses in general. I remember he was sort of the guy that sort of walked me through why he thought they were bad for the industry. And he's had a pretty cool career to date, seeing what he's done.
Have you read his book? It's really
I had USA G'day.
That's the one.
He's a smart guy, really smart guy. And when he was talking to me about licensees not working in the favor for anyone, then I remember learning about it. I've got a couple of mates at this stage who do have licenses. So I'm going to park the I would say the revenue and asset value argument, which is going to disappear for these guys for a moment, and just sort of come at it from an advisor and consumer point of view. And that is, getting rid of licenses and having individuals licensed for themselves is exactly where the industry has been headed for the last, especially last sort of 5 years. I know I've got other mates that just do little co-ops together and make no money out of the license, but to split the costs or go out and do the working and become self-licensed. But it seems ridiculous. It seems this idea that an individual or small co-op has to go to this level of work just to be self-licensed, as if they are the largest aligned dealer group in the country, right? It's absurd. So I mean, I'd love to see individuals being licensed. I'd love to see it being easy. I'd love to see, and the expectation that this can all happen, I think, is off the back of these increased expectations, right? So there's all these educational expectations. Okay, cool. You want to demand professionalism from this industry, then start treating us like a professional as well, because a lot more work in 2020 is done without any commissions attached than there was in 1980, than there was in 2000. And it's becoming a smaller and smaller via legislation revenue model. So even getting paid via a license is kind of, for some advisors, already redundant. But is becoming, the amount of money that needs to go through a license is becoming ridiculously small, right? It has to be product issued. So as advisors are getting to a stage where they're receiving less and less commission revenue, then it makes sense to be self-licensed. That's my point of view. Now, the AFSL doing the work to regulate products, this is where I thought was kind of interesting. So in a nutshell, are you saying that advisors are all individually licensed? However, if they want some level of oversight over the products that that's getting used, then they can join an AFSL voluntarily, I would imagine, that does all the research on the products that are used, and then they pay a fee to be a part of that AFSL. Is that the angle?
Not quite, no.
Okay.
So we think that individual registration of financial planners is a no-brainer. It's going to happen. And in fact, the legislation that brought in the professional standards and ethics framework requires you to be individually registered with a code monitoring body, and that will be a government regulator. The issue with the current system is if you do want to change licensees, you have to be deauthorized by one licensee and you have to be authorized by another. And I mean, before FASEA sort of came in, you had planners who had been planning for 15, 20 years, and they would change licensee, and suddenly the licensee is going, actually, you don't meet the RG 146 education requirements. You got to go off and do this course. And like, I've been a planner for 20 years. What do you it's important that an individual has self-responsibility for ensuring they meet education requirements and self-responsibility for making sure they maintain those education requirements through CPD. And, if you want to make sure that somebody is complying with the law, make sure that they themselves have to comply with the law, not through some other structure. But there's a real big spectrum of where things, where this recommendation we've got can land. It can be as simple as financial planners just have to register with a single disciplinary body and everything else stays the same, or it can be all the way to licensees are no longer there and no longer need to do anything. And we haven't necessarily landed on any particular position. To this point, there are a lot of brilliant licensees. They are providing brilliant services and amazing support and great compliance, and make a massive amount of difference to the consumers that come and see financial planners under that licensees. And we know there are other licensees who are doing the wrong thing, and they force the wrong standards, and they force the wrong rules, and they encourage people to do the wrong things. And then as soon as a regulator comes in, they point back down to the planner and go, no, that guy did it by himself and it's not us. Don't look at us, look at him, and he's got to be banned. And you got this broad spectrum. And I think there's a lot of licensees who are reading the trends and the way people are moving around. There's a lot more people going to self-licensed practices and small practices. There are licensees who are now providing services into those self-licensed practices. And, those are good business models, and they provide a lot of support and help for financial planners. So we think this is kind of just the natural evolution of where things are going anyway. We think this aligns us better with other professions. I can't think of another profession out there where you have a one-on-one relationship with a consumer, but you're regulated through a large corporate entity, and they're weird. Actually responsible for the whole relationship that you do. It is weird. It's a really hospital weird. Doesn't make a doctor. A law firm doesn't make a lawyer. Yeah. And a KPMG doesn't make an accountant. But A&P makes a financial planner.
No, it's 100%. It's weird.
So that's kind of where we think that the role for the individual planner goes. In terms of the product authorization, every product has to be, or it effectively has to be distributed, and disclosure rules and consumer protection rules and things have to be implemented by an AFSL. So products have AFSLs attached to them. And so all we're saying is we'll keep the products with the AFSLs. That's what AFSLs can do. Advice is something different. Advice is about a personal relationship with a professional and their client, and let's regulate the professional as a professional, not as a type of product, because that's what we are at the moment. We are regulated as a type of product, and we're not a type of product. We're a professional service. And so from that perspective, I think, there are financial planners who want to own their own businesses and want to own their own regulation and want to do everything themselves, and that's currently kind of where the self-licensing fits in. And there are others, and I must admit, when I was a planner, I felt really comfortable that I had an employer who paid my wages and provided me with all the tools and services and support I needed, and I could do the job. All I had to concentrate on was helping my clients and doing a brilliant job for my clients, and they took care of everything else. And that was good. I like that. I could help a lot more clients and a lot more people operating that way. But that's not for everybody. Not everybody wants that control. And I had a pretty good licensee at that time. So I think you'll have different models. You will have employee models still. You will have models that are more like you have a practice and there is an organization there that provides support for the practice. You'll have individual financial planners who sit in their office and buy different bits of services from different suppliers based on what they particularly need for their business. And you'll have a spectrum of all that. And there are some licensees who are already out there looking at these types of models and going, okay, we've got to pivot our business to cater to that, because that is the future of financial planning. It's already happening. They already see it. They already see it today, and I think, and that's kind of where we're going. So in terms of what the AFSLs would do, would they be providing APL type services? Well, no, a financial planner wouldn't need to be with a licensee to have an APL and buy a package of products that they can recommend. But in saying that, there is a lot of protective benefit, and there is a lot of benefit to having that sort of thing in place. Having somebody there that really understands products and can actually dig down and look in to say, you know what, this one doesn't smell right.
Yeah, no, that
Not only does it
kind
not smell right, there's a lot of problems with this product.
Therefore,
you shouldn't recommend it. And for an individual financial planner, that can be challenging to have that.
Yes.
Have that knowledge. I hated investments. I hated products when I was a planner. I loved the strategy. I loved understanding the client. I loved keeping them on track. I hated the product bit of it. That was me. Some planners, on the other hand, they absolutely are brilliant at building portfolios, and that's fantastic. And for me, I need somebody there to say, this product's good, and I'll back it to be good.
Yeah.
This product is really, really bad, and you shouldn't go near it. And I go, all right, I'm not going to go near that. And I think that's where, you know, I think there's still a service there that needs to be provided, but I don't think you need to be authorized by a licensee to actually get that service.
Yeah, no, that was kind of what I was alluding to, because you've got your BT Opens and IOOF has some, and I would imagine that if people are becoming more and more self-licensed, which is what's already been happening, but if we get to the point where it's only self-licensing, those optional services would be awesome, but then having the universe of products to look at would be awesome as well. So then that whole argument of, because realistically, the only argument that I can figure out against an aligned or vertically integrated advisor at the moment, because of FOFA, right? Technically, it's open slather, but they are limited by the APL. So if a self-licensed advisor chose to associate themselves with a BT Open or equivalent, then there would be some level of oversight on investments, but then it was only optional. You didn't have to. I think that's all really good. But then the problem comes down to, and this is 2.4 in your document, professional indemnity, right? Yeah. So professional indemnity is a very interesting thing. And we spoke about it very briefly before we started recording, but you guys have done a lot with trying to get professional indemnity as benefit. So before we go into it, the legislation, the limited liability legislation, says that if you're professional services, then you're limited in how much you can be sued by the government. It says, okay, you actually, instead of you being completely open to the market, we're going to put a hard cap on how much you have to pay out of pocket in the event that something goes wrong, right? In the event a mistake occurs. So that's a very interesting thing. And once a profession has that, as doctors do, as accountants do, as lawyers do, once you have that, your professional indemnity bill plummets. Let's face it, right? You're not open for millions and millions. You're open for a set figure. Great. Now, you guys did a lot of work. The PIFA have done a lot of work, and they seem to be pushing it closer and closer and closer to success. I'm excited from an academic point of view, where we're going to have the first professionally recognized advisors in Australia. I find that is very, very awesome. Now, my understanding is that has been a real journey to do via, from what I can tell, via the FPA as well. I think there was a bit of work picked up along that way, sort of like shooting comets straight past, getting the gravity of Earth. But these guys are looking to get it done, which I'm excited about. But the interesting thing is, once that, once the premise has been set for financial planners in Australia getting the professional status, getting access to this limited liability legislation, reducing the cost of PI cover, there's nothing that says that FPA, AFA, any of the other guys can actually adopt a framework similar, because it's already through, and have it for X percentage of your members, right? I would imagine that there's like a FBA plus or something like that, where if you belong to these set of criteria, then you move across to here and you become professional. Like there's nothing that stops you guys from joining that list. And that's really attractive, right? To me, that's a really good news story, because while all costs are going up across the board, and if we do this singular licensing situation, risks then go up across the board. So that if you can lean into this concept of the government saying you're limited in how much you can be sued by, your professional indemnity insurance plummets, that's a winner chicken dinner. So what have you guys done so far with professional indemnity? And then how far away till we are to FPA plus?
At the moment, we're really just trying to keep the professional indemnity market going. It's
I can understand.
It's come up in the XY forums I've seen, but there's virtually no PI offers left in the country.
Yeah, it's brutal.
So I think at one stage a couple of years ago there was about 6 PI insurers you could go to, and they kind of came in and went out and moved in and changed offers, but there were kind of 6 of them that were playing around, and there was usually 4 or 5 of them in the market at any one time. So we understand that there's 1 or 2 PI insurers who are still in the market. And if you've got policies with them, they will renew them, but they're renewing them with significant increases in premiums.
Yeah.
And that they're putting, you almost have to increase the excesses and get rid of some of the benefits and things that sort of sat in there. So it is becoming virtually impossible if you need to get a new PI policy to actually get one in place. So a lot of the work we've been doing over the last 12 months is just trying to keep PI insurers in the country.
Wow.
And ensure that, because one of the things with licensing is you can't be authorized to be a financial planner if you don't have a licensee. You can't be a licensee if you don't have a PI policy in place.
Right.
If we can't get PI policies at the licensee level, then the whole thing just unravels. So we're just trying to kind of hold the show together at the moment.
Man.
But I think when you look at any profession, PI is a massive issue. It's a massive cost. It's a massive problem. In professions where you are individually licensed, the cost to the individual for PI tends to be lower than what we see in financial planning, where you're licensed through a licensee. And the problem for that is you're only as good as the worst financial planner in your licensee. And the whole cost of PI is sort of spread across for that worst person. So if you're individually licensed, then you will get a PI policy based on you individually, not others. And so generally what that means is PI costs are significantly lower for individuals than what you get in these kind of group situations. On top of that, you can then get things like professional associations negotiating with PI groups, that if somebody says, here's the legal standard and the regulatory standard I need to comply with, but what I'm going to do is sign up to a code of ethics, and I'm going to be monitored and audited and try to adhere to this code of ethics, which sits higher, that the PI insurers will go, okay, well, if you're going to do that, then we will rate you with a lot less risk than somebody else who doesn't want to do that. And so again, you get this risk reduction and you get a cheaper policy that works out the other side of it. So again, that's kind of the benefit of individual licensing. Now that has to play out, and you have to see how it happens, and it will take time to get there. But PI is getting to be a big problem. We also have this spectre of a compensation scheme of last resort coming in, and some of the people listening will have heard of the compensation scheme of last resort, but a lot won't have. But if you think PI costs are bad, just wait till this compensation scheme of last resort comes in.
Wait, is this something that advisors are going to have to chip in for?
Yeah. So this is a Royal Commission. This was a recommendation that came out before the Royal Commission, but has been wrapped into the Royal Commission implementation. So it's recommendation 7.1. of the roadmap for implementing the Royal Commission. But what it is a compensation scheme of last resort to cover the entire financial services industry.
Yeah, right.
And so the problem is, if a financial planner doesn't pay compensation to a consumer, then this compensation scheme of last resort, which we'll all put in for, will pay out to the consumer. If a financial planner doesn't pay compensation to a whole group of clients, then you start to get a bigger bill that plays out. But the problem is with lumping us in with the entire financial services industry is a lot of the time that will work fine, but HIH was a financial product.
Yeah.
Storm was essentially selling financial products. Trio and Astara and Basis Capital are financial products. And the compensation that would have come out of those if they actually paid them is hundreds of millions of dollars in one hit. And that has to be funded. And so you start to spread that across financial planners and it becomes a problem. And so the recommendation 2.4 around professional indemnity insurance is actually more about what are the things that need to be put in place to stop getting to a point where you actually need to rely on a compensation scheme of last resort.
Absolutely.
To be put in place anyway. And the government did a report in 2012 called the Richard St. John Report about what are the measures that need to be put in place. For example, one of the problems we've got at the moment is that if your PI premiums are going up, one of the ways you can reduce them is to increase the deductible.
Sure.
So you increase the deductible, you get a claim. If it's within the deductible, you pay it yourself. But because that's a lot higher, those are becoming quite large sums of money that you have to find somewhere out of your business to pay that compensation. Or you don't have it, so you go under. So the PI policy no longer applies, and so you end up with this compensation issue that goes into a pool that all of us have to pay for.
Right.
So you got to fix up deductibles.
Imagine an advisor sitting out there working their tail off to be as good as humanly possible, and then they're somehow responsible for another horrible advisor from 20 years ago that did something really bad. This is the exposure to risk is too high. It's too high.
So, I mean, from a certain perspective, luckily the government said, look, we're not going to go back 20 years on this thing. But what they have said is that they will go back to, the date escapes me, but I'm pretty sure it was like the 1st of January 2019. So any piece of advice that's been provided since the 1st of January 2019, might have been 30th of June 2018. There's a lot of dates that we're going. But
yeah.
But effectively, we're already on the hook for this compensation scheme of last resort. So a bad piece of advice that's being provided today, consumer makes a complaint in 2 years' time, 3 years' time. Planners negotiated this massive deductible for their self-license. Suddenly they can't pay the deductible, so they declare bankruptcy and they go under. The claim goes through the compensation scheme of last resort, and now we're covering that bad piece of advice. So this PI thing is about how can we ensure that there is PI? How can we ensure that it operates effectively the way it should? That if somebody needs to make a claim against it, if somebody has to pay a deductible, it's that they can pay it. That the PI will be there to pay out and compensate the consumer if need be. How can we sort out the whole compensation arrangements to protect consumers? And if we then get to a point that we need a compensation scheme of last resort to mop up that last little bit that's just not quite protected, then fine, let's do that. But there's a lot of stuff we need to sort out on the way through. So there's this great report called the St. John Report, which has some very sensible recommendations in it. And effectively what we're saying to government is if you want to move forwards with making changes to PI, with compensation schemes of last resort, then let's actually get PI right. And we've got a great roadmap to actually do that in place, and we're just ignoring it.
Wow. Yeah, I had no idea about any of that. That's pretty terrifying, to be honest. It's another reason why we really got to watch out if we don't want a parallel profession to spring up next to financial advice. This stuff needs to be considered. And the last one is, and it's a very much a good news story. But you guys, I'm very proud to say, are leading the charge in terms of getting tax deductibility done. Now, I know this has been something that you guys have been wanting to do for a long time. XY, we've been playing a little supportive role behind the scenes the last few months to try and give it some momentum. But for as much as you can talk about it, there's a pretty clear strategy in place in terms of tackling it, rather than having to go all the way to down to Canberra and have conversations with people that get pitched to 24 hours a day. There's a better strategy, and let's wrap it up with this. Yeah, what's your feelings in terms of, I don't know, as much as you can say, timelines, anything like that?
Yeah, I think you learn things through a journey, and we've had tax deductibility advice on the radar for a long time. In fact, I mean, we had advocated for and were successful in getting the Labor government of 2007, 2008, just after they came in, to actually say in a report that they would implement tax deductible advice. So we were kind of there. We thought we had victory in place. Unfortunately, the GFC happened, and the budget's been in a mess since then. And while we thought we were getting nice and close again to budget surpluses and a position where we might be able to negotiate these things, unfortunately we've had this pandemic and an economic crisis, and it's going to be another decade at least before budgets are balanced, right? So we'd kind of been hoping to get to this point, that the government had said that they would do it at some point. They would be supportive of it. We're now regulated by the TPB, so why should we have a different tax deductibility status than what accountants do? And we were kind of getting close with the arguments, but it's just, unfortunately, the current economic situation, it's not going to happen. So we are working with some consultants who can give their all to this. We're working with some really good, amazing tax experts who understand tax deductibility and the ATO, and how they make determinations. And I'm hopeful that over the remaining half of the rest of 2020, we can make some really good progress on trying to get advice declared tax deductible by the government. I'm happy to have conversations about it, but we're also working with a regulator, with the ATO, and they need time to get their head around it, and they need time to consider the issue, consider what's changed over the last 20 years since the original piece of advice was done. And so we kind of need a little bit of space and working room and give them some respect and time to make decisions themselves. If we're successful, then it won't be too long, hopefully, before we have tax deductible advice for everybody. If we're not, then that's where FPA, XY can work together, and we can start to advocate in Canberra with politicians in their local communities, take our clients, and come up with a whole strategy for how we actually convince politicians that not only should this happen, but it must happen sooner rather than later. And we've got a whole strategy worked out for that, and we've got a lot of advocacy that we're ready to do, but we just need time to work through this process that we're working through at the moment. And more than happy to give updates over time. But all I can say is, we're definitely working on it. We're confident that we're mounting the strongest argument we actually can. And if they say no to it, then they're going to have a pretty good reason why they're saying no. And that's where we start to need to have the law changed. And I think we've hopefully got the members between us that we can actually get out there and have good conversations with politicians and make the argument that this is something that absolutely needs to be done. So
yeah, financial advice has one hidden advantage, and that's called Adrian Paddy knows how to get very good times at a bar. So what the strategy is, from my point of view, is we just let that little, I call him Paddy Bahamas, is when he's had like about 6 drinks, and he just starts dancing from the hips. We just send him out, catch up with all the ATO guys. I reckon by 2 a.m., the deal's done.
Unfortunately, I think the ATO guys are a little bit more like me, and
that's why we send in Paddy.
We're the guys sitting in the dark corner, going, "God, I hope they don't look at us. We don't want to." I'm not really doing that up. No,
you can't say no to that smile. That's he just walks. Yeah. Oh, he's a lover.
No, I get that. He gets away with a lot. That
he does.
There's a lot of things that he gets out of us that we go, no, we're not doing that. All right, Adrian. All right.
Story of my life. Mate, well, thank you for coming on, sharing. Like I said, it's a good news story. I realize as an association, you got to respond and to a lot of things, but getting, I guess, some thoughts together in one document about the positive stuff that's coming forward, about where the future of advice is. There's a lot of stuff there that a lot of advisors can get behind, and it's really awesome to see. So thanks for putting time aside, and looking forward to supporting you guys however we can.
Thanks for having me, Clayton. And I'd just encourage everyone to actually don't just read the trade press and the headlines and
totally.
It's 18 pages. It's really only 15 pages. It's a nice, easy read, but it just puts out a vision for what the FPA, after we consulted with our members and we spoke to them and we tested ideas and ran things up and down the organisation and spitballed things around. It's just a vision of what we think the future of advice could look like, and that we think should look like.
Yep.
And to your point, there's stuff that's no brainer, and the stuff that I don't really think we need to do that. I'm not going to get on board for that last 10% of whatever it is, but
sure.
And everybody will be different, but.
Yep.
I think there's stuff in there that everybody can say, yeah, that makes sense. That should be good. And I'd encourage everyone to have a read of it, because I think we think most of this stuff is a no-brainer. And if you can kind of know where things are going, then you can kind of know where we need to get to from today to what it might look like in the future. And it'll, it won't be as much of a shock when we get there. So thank you for having me on, and thanks XY people for listening, and reach out if there's anything you need. You can find me playing with Lego.
Yes.
Social media everywhere.
I love it, mate. It's awesome. All right, very cool. Well, again, thanks for coming on, mate. Appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks.
Cheers.